Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining another DevTest Community Webcast. Today we're covering what's new in TDM 4.1, which is our most recent release that's been put out there. Today we have the TDM product team covering it. If you have any questions as we're going through today's session, please feel free to enter those questions into the Q&A box. You'll find that in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you put your question in there, we do have people answering questions, so we might get to you during the presentation, or if we're not able to answer your question during the presentation, we'll also pause at the end and cover any questions that have accumulated in that Q&A box. At the end, we'll also be opening the line up for any verbal questions. So if you have a question that you'd rather ask over the phone, you can just hold it until the end, and at that point, I'll let you know how to unmute your line to ask those questions. I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda for today. So we're covering quite a few of the new features available in TDM 4.1. First up is the tester self-service, find and reserve. We have Abhijit Mugali from the product team covering that. And then the rest of the features from parameterized variables on will be covered by Richard Martin. So I'm going to hand the call over to Abhijit now. Let me just pass you the ball. All right, take it away, Abhijit.
Great. Thanks, Malini. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon the part of the world you have dialed in. Thanks again for making it to the call. So today I'll be covering one of the marquee functionalities which we have delivered as part of TDM 4.1. On the call today, I'm going to talk about the new tester self-service find and reserve functionality. At one level, you can think about this functionality as an enhancement to the current test match functionality, which enables testers to reserve unique, hard-to-find data in the system. But at another level, you can really think about it changes the way in which the testers access the data, find the data, and possibly make the data, and finally reserve the data. So at the beginning of this release, I worked with many customers to essentially understand the constraints with the current test match and how we could really improve not only the functional gaps, but also the overall user experience. So at the beginning, what I would like to do is essentially articulate the problem statements which I heard from many of the customers. One good thing was that the problem statements were pretty much consistent across a majority of the customer. And this will give you also an overview of our thinking on enhancing this particular capability. So in terms of the problem statements, essentially I have kind of split into two parts. One deals with the persona of a data analyst or the test data engineer. Typically, this is the persona who configures the system, test match in this case, and enables the data to be found by the testers. So when we talk to the TDEs, we kind of heard several enhancements requests, but we kind of distilled down to the three problem statements which you kind of see on the screen. So one thing which we kind of consistently heard over and over again was that the functionality was extremely admin intensive to enable. So if you look at the current test match functionality, it requires you to configure ETL scripts, write SQL joins, create a denormalized data mart, do configurations on Agile Requirements Designer to create forms, and so on. So this problem statement came up pretty much as the top priority in a sense that if you're going to enhance this functionality, make sure that you dramatically lower the admin overhead needed to enable this. Next, we also heard a lack of common language. So typically, the testers who work on line of business applications see things on the screen which don't necessarily correlate with what you see in the underlying databases. Just as an example, with one of the banking customers which we work with, there is a consistent account number field on their screens, but when you look at the backend database, essentially it's an aggregation of 4 fields. So the next problem statement essentially dealt with how we can bridge and have a common language between the testers who work on the applications and the TDEs who need to configure the backend data sources to enable reservation of test data. Finally, the current architecture was fairly restrictive. It supported only relational data sources. Also, the denormalized table or the test smart was supported on essentially one database, and there was no really support for data sources like vsam files or APIs, and the architecture itself was like fairly restrictive so that we couldn't essentially enhance it to support these new data sources. That kind of summarizes the top 3 things which we kind of heard from the test data engineers. We had similar feedback from the testers, but it had a slightly different flavor to it. One of the things the testers told upfront was that our product really didn't support the natural way they worked on a day-to-day basis to find and reserve data. So typically, the testers would like to essentially specify test data characteristics, see a result of the test data which matches those characteristics, probably visualize them.
Abhijit, you're breaking up a little bit.
Is it better right now?
That sounds better, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So visualize the data, interrogate the data, and then essentially determine the suitability of the data so that they can make the reservation on that. Whereas currently, if you look at the test match capability, it provided you a form to specify the test data characteristics. But really, it didn't provide any ability to look at the data and visualize the data before doing a reservation. Other thing which came up was also a lack of support for APIs. This is very important because a lot of our customers would like to reserve the test data at the beginning of a test case execution, then execute the automated tests, and finally release the data. We had some support for APIs in the test match, but really it wasn't up to a level which could support these rapid release cycles. Finally, wrapping up on the problem statements for the tester was the inability to generate synthetic data in context, which means that, let's say, as a tester, I go ahead and find the data, and let's say it's not there in my particular environment, or I don't have enough copies of the test data, I need to make the data in context. Today, you can do that creating a separate form, but that really kind of breaks up the whole user experience. Yeah, I just heard a comment that it is still breaking up. Melanie, is it like okay or?
It keeps like cutting in and out. Like you sound okay for a minute, and then it'll start to sound a little bit broken up again.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Let me know if it gets worse. I'll try to speak slowly. I don't know whether that will help.
Yeah, no, you're breaking up right now. Yeah, I'm not sure what the cause is.
Just a second. Let me just use the other this thing.
Okay.
I just tried to reconnect again.
Okay, it sounds all right, but there's an echo now.
Yeah, hopefully it should be gone now.
That's better.
Okay. So let's continue. Okay, that kind of wraps up the problem statement. So we will be able to address all of these in the current release, but this essentially kind of outlines our thought process to address these deficiencies within the product. So in TDM 4.1, we have a set of core value propositions which we are delivering as an initial cut. The first thing which we are delivering is a concept of an environment. So we typically didn't have environment in the current product. So we had just a set of connection profiles.
So obviously, it's really hard to hear you.
Let's do that. I'll just quickly cover this, and probably for the demo, I'll like redial back in, and probably in the meantime, Richard Martin can do his demo.
Okay, yeah, that would be good. Okay. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Just a few technical difficulties. Been having a little bit of trouble with WebEx lately, especially with the voice over IP. So we'll just give Abhijit a second to try and reconnect to the phone line before we proceed. While he's doing that, just a reminder, if you have any questions that you have about the presentation as we're going through, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. That way, all of our panelists can see them and try to get you an answer as quickly as possible. Any of those that we're not able to answer right away, we will cover at the end of the session. So if you have a question, put it in right when you see the topic you have the question on, and we'll try to get to it. And if not, we can always cover it at the end of the session.
Mommy, I just wanted to check whether it was okay right now.
No, still breaking up. Are you able to dial in instead of using the voice over IP? I think that might be what the issue is.
Yeah, I'm just dialed in, but I think my line is muted.
Okay.
Just give me a second.
Okay. We also have another webcast coming up at the end of May, I believe. That's going to be on DevTest and performance testing. Let me take a closer look at that event. DevTest for performance testing. That's going to be on May 17th. And we have an office hours session on May 25th. Office hours are where you join a live chat, and you can chat live with product experts on any questions you have.
Melanie, I just dialed back in.
Much better.
Over the phone. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay.
Okay. Moving on, right? So we were talking about a set of core value propositions. So I talked about the concept of an environment. So we are delivering that, which consists of a logical grouping of application data sources. Then we also are delivering a logical model via the UI so that you can build your denormalized data mart. It's actually not a denormalized data mart, but a logical model. Finally, we have a self-service catalog UI so that the testers can find the data and also reserve the data. And all of this is kind of backed up by a set of REST APIs, which can be used to call this functionality using automation scripts. So with that, I'll quickly switch over to the demo. Just a quick audio check. Is it fine right now?
Yeah, you sound good now.
Okay. Great. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So right now, what I have done is I have logged on to the Test Data Manager portal. I've logged in as a TDE. I've used my administrator credentials. I'm within a project called as Order Management version 1.0. And my use case essentially deals with enabling my testers to reserve an order ID within the system. So this is the schema which we are using for the demo today. So essentially, this is the sample order management system, which comes with the SQL Server database. So it has a hierarchy of orders, order details, products, etc. And as a TDE, what I want to do is I want to reserve the order IDs with various characteristics, be it on the products or the suppliers, and have them reserve that data. So initially, just before the demo, I have registered all of these tables into my TDM portal. In order to utilize the tester self-service find and reserve capability, you need to create what is called as a test data model. So think of a test data model as a logical model which consists of the relationships between the various data fields. Again, these fields can be spread across multiple different databases residing on multiple servers. So I will go ahead and click on a new test data model. So let me give it a name. So I will say it as find orders. I can give it a description. As you might have noticed, this is a wizard, and this is the step 1 of the wizard. I click on next. So in this, what I can do is create my environments. So the environments, like it's mentioned over here, is an aggregation of
data sources. So these data sources can be present on the same server or can be spread across multiple servers. As you notice, I have one environment called as dev here. Let me say new environment, and let's call this as a QA environment. So down below in the screen, you can add data sources. Since this application resides on a single SQL Server database, I have a single data source name called as SQLS, and I can associate with a connection profile to connect to it. But let's say your application is spread across SQL Server and Oracle. You can add two data sources, one for SQL Server and the other for Oracle. So I'll keep it like this and hit on save. I can create as many environments I want, but I need to select one environment, preferably which has all of the connection profiles working to build my test data model. I click on next, which takes me to the step 3 of the wizard. So in this step, I can select a model key. So the model key is nothing but a primary report key column in our earlier test match. So essentially, this is the ID which drives the reservation across the hierarchy. So if I kind of quickly switch back to our schema, this equates to the order ID. Similar to test match, we do support multiple IDs, but in this case, it's just a single key. So on the screen, I have two panels. On the left-hand side, what I can see is a list of all of the registered tables. I can paginate through them, or I can do a search across these tables. I'll go ahead and click on orders and select order ID using the middle shuffle control. So whenever you add a particular field in this wizard, it is a two-step process. So the first step adds the parent table. So in this case, it's the orders. I can also rename this, and I can do interesting things if the table has self-referencing relationships. Like, for example, in our schema, the employee table has self-referencing relationships. So I can once add it as employees and once add it as managers. So in this case, I'll keep it as orders. So that's the first step. So you add the initial table, and then you add the actual column, which in our case is order ID. So in this database schema, everything is named nicely. So I can keep it as order ID. But let's say in the application, let's say it was called order number, I can change the field here and say it as order number and have that reflected all across. So let me hit on save, and that selects the model key. Again, like I mentioned, if it is a composite key, you can add multiple IDs over here. The final step of the wizard allows you to select the data elements. These data elements essentially act as filters. So let's say I add a data element called as quantity. I can search order IDs with that particular quantity. So let's go ahead and add fields to filter upon. So initially, let's go and add few things from the orders table. since the table has already been added, I'm just prompted to add the field name, in this case, the order date. Similarly, let's say I add freight, maybe ship address. Let's add a couple of more. Let's add postal code. And let's say ship country. Okay. So once I have added, these are reflected on the right-hand pane. Now let's try to add something on a table which is not present on the right-hand pane. So let's say we add a unit price to our data element. So like I mentioned, it's a two-step process, but in this case, the system doesn't know how order details is related to orders. So I have this form element wherein I can specify the relationship. So in this case, I select orders, and I know the relationship as one-to-many, but I can select one-to-one too, and our algorithm will take care of it. And we automatically populate the join fields, which in this case is order ID on orders and order ID on order details. So in here, I can also add multiple join columns if needed. In this case, I'll just hit on next. Similar screen wherein I can rename the unit price, and finally hit on save. Similarly, now I can add other fields. Let's say I add discount. Let's add one more table. So if you go back to the hierarchy, there is a relationship between orders, order details, and products. So let's say we go with the products. Okay. Let's add something. Let's add units in stock. Okay. Similar to that, it doesn't know the association. So I select order details over here. You notice that the join key is automatically populated. And finally, I can hit on save. So to wrap it up, I can hit on finish, and my test data model gets created. So the important thing in this is that maybe we spent around 5 or 10 minutes on this visit, but really in the backend, it takes care of all of the work which you had to previously do to write SQL scripts, create a denormalized table, configure the data maker, configure the ARD forms, so on and so forth. So all of that admin activity, which was the first problem statement, essentially gets encapsulated in a simple 4-step wizard. Here, I can display this to the tester, but since I have logged in as an administrator, it is immediately available in my self-service catalog forms. So these appear along with your traditional ARD forms. So this is our find orders of the order management. As you can notice, it's a simple form right now. There is no drop down in 4.1, but that's coming up in the later releases. Importantly, I can select an environment, and when I hit find data, essentially it goes to this environment, utilizes the connection profiles, and brings in the real-time data. So this is not similar to TestSmart where you had just stage data. which was maybe a day old or few hours old. This is real-time data from the system. Typically, we display only a subset of the forms. You can click on See More, and let's say I see units on stock as 10, and find data. I get orders where unit on stock is 10. Also on the grid, what we do is we do an infinite scroll. We bring in data in chunks of 20. So as you keep on scrolling, you can get additional data in the system. Also, this control has the ability to add and delete columns. As a tester, once I'm happy with the data, I can select few of them and hit on Reserve. But going back to the problem statement, in the later releases, what we want to do is once you find the data, like Reserve is an action over here, we also want to provide additional actions like copy, clone, actions which can call a publish or a generic Javelin flow, so that in context you can find the data, make it if it's not available, and then finally reserve it. So in this case, I'll just select a few orders and hit Reserve. I can give it a name. It can be a test case name, and click on OK. So the job gets created, and if I drill down, I can see that my model keys have been reserved in the system. So if I go back and search, I wouldn't be able to get these model keys or these order IDs. Finally, as a tester, once I have utilized these, I can just go ahead and release the reservations, which in this case would again make it available as part of the find results. So this kind of quickly wraps up the demo. I wanted to point out a couple of additional things. So all of the functionality which you see below has been enabled using REST APIs, and that is available as Swagger documentation. In addition, we have like the example of the order management system, which I just talked about. We have slightly complex modeling, wherein you can model the same table, essentially tables which have self-referencing relationships. Also, we have captured performance metrics. So our test environment was Oracle, SQL, and a DB2 on AS400, and there were like million records on orders and so on and so forth. So the performance is pretty good, primarily because we use a graph database technology, which doesn't incur the join penalty. So we do like almost a parallel query and in-memory join of the results. So even if you have like multiple tables and attributes across multiple tables, you would still find that the performance is very good compared to a traditional join. So that wraps up my portion of the presentation. Again, I apologize for the audio issues, but I'll just pause just to check if there are any questions.
At this point, I'll open it up for audio questions for this section of the webcast. If you'd like to ask an audio question, you can unmute yourself by clicking #6 on your telephone keypad. We'll give it just a second. Okay, I don't think there are any questions for right now. Once again, if you think of any, you can feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end of the session today.
Okay, great. So I'll hand over control to Richard. Richard, all yours.
Thanks. Thank you. Can you hear me, Melanie?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. Just checking I wasn't on mute. Okay. How do I get to the slides?
There should be a tab in your WebEx, and then you can use the arrows at the top to page back and forth.
No, I don't see it.
Okay, if you look next to Event Info and Quick Start under the main menu.
Event Info.
On the left.
I can see Event Info. I just can't see slides.
Okay, if you'd like me to page through for you, I can do that, or I can display it on my screen also, however you want to do it.
Okay. Just whatever works.
Okay, can you see where it says parameterized variables?
Nope. No, it still says core value propositions. Okay,
so up above that, it should say 7 in a box, and then an arrow to the right. There you go.
Oh,
now you're on page 12. There you go. Okay.
Got it. I found them.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about all that. Okay. Right. Okay. So the point of parameterized variables. Let's get my notes. Okay. So in Data Maker and Portal, you have this notion of variable, which everyone understands, and they contain values, but also expressions. Now, there was a request from a customer to extend this notion so that a parameterized variable is more like a macro, really, but you can specify arguments to it and use those arguments in an expression which gets evaluated at runtime. And the point of it, here we go. So really, the way it worked previously was that a variable was secretly a function with no arguments at all, and all we've done is to make it more of a real function, although we're still limited to one expression. So so in TDM Web 4.1, you can specify a variable with arguments in the name, and then you use them in the expression by bracketing them with just a hash sign. So in this example here, we have a variable called v1 with a single parameter, and all it does is that it adds whatever param1 is to whatever the value of v2 is. So if you called it with 100, an argument of 100, and v2 had the value 2, the result would be 102. So that's very straightforward. And the whole point of it. Here we go. The whole point of it is that a lot of expressions used in publishers can be very long and difficult to debug. So you only really want one copy of them, and you don't want to cut and paste multiple versions, which are all slightly different, because then you get a maintenance nightmare. So it's much better if you can have one definition, and then you can modify it to various degrees by just specifying various parameters. And those parameters can be used to change the behavior of the macro, or just the way it evaluates things, or use the values as part of the calculation of whatever it's doing. And the other reason is that you can build up a library of these things. So if you find yourself using the same expression over and over, rather than cut and paste it, you can define variables at global scope. Then you can reuse them in any number of projects, and then that you can be sure that once they're written and tested, then you don't have to keep retesting them over and over for every project that you do. So the way you create them the way you create them is that you use the variables page, and I'll demonstrate this in a moment, and you just specify the variables as part of the name, and the expression is defined using Data Painter as usual. When you try and validate that, Data Painter will try and do the best it can to evaluate it, but if it doesn't know the arguments, then it's going to get stuck, and so it just does a syntax check. Otherwise, it works just like anything else. Now, I've got some somewhat contrived examples here. So the first one, but they show the idea. I don't think anybody would use these in real life. So there's a variable called ifMore5, and all it does is that it outputs yes if its argument is more than 5, otherwise it says no. But it illustrates the point that the argument is embedded in that if, and it can do an evaluation on that and output a result. The second one is simply showing that you can combine functions like if and sum and output something. And the others are more sort of trivial. Say hello just repeats hello n times, whatever it is. And the last one just computes factorials using the traditional recursive function. But that's just to illustrate you can put fairly complicated things in there. So, whoops, I'll just switch to my screen and I'll give a demo of this. Okay, so what I've got, so the variables you've just seen, I've got here, plus an extra one called useed, and all it does is that it takes the name you give it as the name of a seed list, picks something out of it, and appends the word hello and converts to uppercase. Again, it's a bit sort of contrived, but you get the idea. And I've created a generator. And all it is that I just use one of these functions, well, macros in each of the columns. And the first two are just recomputed using the row number. That's all it's doing. So the first one will be if more 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Second one will be factorial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And the next one should be the days of the week processed, as you can see. So if I go, I'll just check my target is good. Okay, so that's clean and empty. So if I publish, say, I don't know, 15 rows or something, and send it to my target, and then we can have a look. And you can see that column A was the one that tests if it's more or less than 5. So you get a list of no's up until 5, then a list of yeses. Column B is just a list of factorials. And column C is the days of the week, converted to uppercase and prefixed by hello. So that's it for parameterized variables. If you have any questions, just ask or post them. Now if I go back, okay. So Melanie, do you want me to move straight on to S&T?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Unless someone's got a question.
I don't see any right now, yeah.
Okay. So S&T is another new feature. It's something that existed in DataMaker, so we've moved it over to Portal because it's quite useful. And the whole point of it, let's get my notes. Yeah, so the purpose of it is that you can designate a place to publish to, that is a target, and a place you can draw data from, which is the source, without having to set a connection profile in expressions in your generator. And the reason you want that is that you can do publishing with different connections without having to modify the generator itself. So if, for example, you have 50 exec SQL statements in your generator, you don't want to go and have to edit all of them to go and change the source that you're going to take data from. Just by changing one setting, then they all change at once. So it's an expression, it's an example here. So in exec SQL, you give it a connection. So if you, normally you would give it something like p travel, and that means get the connection profile from travel and do a select from there. But with the new feature, you could just say S, the letter S, and it will be whatever the current source is set to. So for some reason this says data maker, but it's exactly the same in Portal. So S, so in this example, the select name would take the data from whatever the source profile is, and the second one will take it from whatever the target is selected as. So if I grab the screen, I can give a little demo. Okay, so if I go, just clean up my targets, my source. Okay, so what I've got two tables. The first one, pets, contains a list of names, as it happens. And all I'm going to do is to have a SQL expression that queries the first table for its name and replicates it in the second table. Obviously trivial, but you get the idea. And the idea is that the expression will say my source is the pets table and the target is the things table. So if I go to my generators, okay. So in this generator, column A is just set to a sequence of items from that select, and the select is set to the current source. Now to actually set the source, I go to the Connection Profiles tab, and there's two new columns, and I can just designate any one of these as my source. Now as it happens, I want it to come from this connection profile called TestMart, which contains those two tables. I'm going to publish to TestMart as well, but I'll just leave it at travel for the moment. So I go back to my generator. Okay. So if I say I'm now going to publish, you'll see that the publish to field has automatically been set to whatever travel was set to. Whatever the target was set to. Now I don't actually want to go there, so I want to go to TestMart. The source connection profile has been set to the same. Okay, so if I now publish, if I do 10 rows, what that should do is produce 10 rows and take the 10 rows from the source table and copy them into my target table by means of this expression here. If I go back to SQL Server and I reevaluate that, you can see that's exactly what it's done. So the first table is my source, and the SQL query picks items out of that name column, and then the publish copies them to the target table, which is the things table. So there you go. So that concludes the S&T demo. Okay, back to you, Melanie.
Okay, so once again, we'll open it up for questions. Last chance, guys. If you have any questions, you can either enter them into the Q&A box, or you can unmute your line using #6 on your telephone keypad to ask a verbal question. I'll just give it a minute here before we move on to see if any questions come in. Okay, well, if there are no questions, then I guess that's just about it for today. If you do think of any questions later on, you can always either enter a question into the community, or you can feel free to comment on the replay that I'll post later today, or reach out to any of us. We're always happy to help you in any way possible. We do have a question in, can we have multiple source or targets?
I'm afraid not, only one at a time. Although that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, also just to add to this, Richard, when you publish, though, you can publish the different targets that we do have.
You would have to specify the connection profile explicitly. You just can't say something like source 1, source 2, source 3. You can have one source, and then the rest, the other sources would have to be named as P my connection 1, P my connection 2. That's how you would have to do it.
Awesome. Okay, great. So once again, any questions, you can feel free to put them in the community. You can reach out to any of us. We're always happy to help. As I mentioned earlier, we do have 2 events coming up later this month for DevTest. We have the DevTest for Performance Testing webcast on May 17th, and we have an office hours session that will cover both TDM and service virtualization, and that will be on May 25th. If you're interested in joining either of those sessions, you can RSVP to those by heading to the DevTest community, and they're right up at the top right-hand corner. Okay, we'll get the replay for today posted later today. I wanted to thank the TDM product team again for a great presentation today. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and everyone have a great day. We'll see you out in the communities.